Sinbad had promised himself he would rest, but the sea kept sending invitations in the form of opportunity and rumour. One calm morning, a captain he trusted asked him to join a trading voyage to a chain of green islands. Sinbad agreed, thinking it would be simple: sail, trade, and return. For many days it was exactly that. The wind was kind, the sailors laughed, and the nights were cool, with stars shining like scattered coins. Then a sudden storm arrived, fast as a snapped rope. The ship fought the waves, creaked, and lost its course. When the rain finally eased, the crew found an unfamiliar island ahead. The mast was strained and several planks had split, so the captain decided to land briefly for water and repairs. Sinbad went ashore with a small group, telling himself to stay alert. Islands could be generous, but they could also be tricky, like stories with hidden endings. The beach looked peaceful, and a clear stream ran nearby. While the sailors filled barrels, Sinbad noticed many footprints leading inland, some fresh, some old, and none returning to the shore. Before he could warn the others, islanders stepped out from the trees. They wore bright beads and woven leaves, and their faces were calm, yet their eyes watched closely. Their leader greeted them politely and invited them to the king's hall for food and rest. The sailors, tired from the storm, wanted to accept. Sinbad agreed with a careful nod, and he kept his hand near his belt pouch, ready for anything. They were guided through a shaded path to a village and a large hall of wood and stone. Inside, bowls of fruit and warm bread were arranged neatly, while smoke from cooking fires drifted up through roof vents. At the far end sat the king on a carved chair. He wore a crown of shells and a cloak of dark feathers. His smile was wide and eager, as if he always wanted more of whatever he tasted. He welcomed them warmly and urged them to eat. Sinbad ate slowly and watched. The servants did not touch the food. Guards stood by the doors. The king's eyes kept returning to the travellers with a hungry kind of interest that made Sinbad's stomach tighten. When the meal ended, the king clapped his hands and declared that his guests must rest properly. Soft ropes were brought out, and in moments the sailors' wrists were bound. Some protested, but the guards were strong. Sinbad kept his voice steady. "Why do you tie us?" he asked. The king's smile did not fade. "Because guests sometimes leave too soon," he said lightly, as if he were speaking of a harmless game. "I am not finished enjoying your company," the sailors whispered in fear. In distant ports, Sinbad had heard rumours of a ruler sailors called the Cannibal King, a king who treated travellers as his meal. Sinbad refused to imagine the worst in detail, but he understood the danger clearly. They were prisoners, and the king's joy was not friendly. That night, they were locked in a side room under watch. Sinbad lay awake and forced his thoughts into order. Panic would waste time. He needed a plan. In the morning the king returned, cheerful again, and ordered the prisoners fed well. "Strength is precious," he said, almost dreamily. Sinbad realized this was not ordinary cruelty. It felt like a strange hunger spell, a craving that made the king believe someone else's strength could fill his own emptiness. Sinbad watched the routines carefully. Guards changed at midday. Knots were loosened when food arrived, then tightened again. And the king was easily distracted, drifting from one thought to the next like a leaf on water. A young servant brought water. He looked nervous and avoided the king's gaze. When the guard stepped away, Sinbad spoke softly. "Why does your king do this?" The boy swallowed and answered in a trembling whisper. "He was not always like this," he said. "He found a black stone in the forest. It promised power and made his hunger endless. He thinks taking travellers will satisfy him, but it never does." The boy's eyes shone with fear. "We cannot stop him." Sinbad felt a path open in his mind. "Where is the stone?" he asked. The boy glanced toward the hall. "In an iron box beneath the throne," he said. "Only the king's key opens it." Sinbad nodded slowly. If the hunger came from the stone, then the stone was the lock on the king's heart. Remove it, and the spell might break. That evening, when the king came to stare at the prisoners, Sinbad bowed. "Great king," he said, "I have sailed far and learned stories that soothe the mind. Let me tell you one. It will please you more than watching frightened men." The king's eyes brightened. "A story?" he asked. Sinbad nodded. "But stories need hands," he added. "Untie me, and I will show you." The king waved lazily, amused, and a guard loosened Sinbad's ropes. Sinbad stood and began a tale about a pearl that held moonlight and a storm that could be calmed by patience. He spoke slowly, letting his voice become a rope that pulled attention toward him. The guards listened. The king leaned forward, caught in the rhythm. As Sinbad spoke, he drifted a step closer to the throne, then another, as if the story itself carried him. At the most suspenseful moment, Sinbad lowered his voice until the hall grew still. "And then," he whispered, "the pearl showed the king a mirror, and in that mirror he saw the thing that was stealing his peace." The Cannibal King's eyes widened. "What thing?" he demanded. Sinbad pointed gently toward the space beneath the throne. "The shadow under your own seat," Sinbad said, and the king glanced down without thinking. Sinbad knelt as if bowing, but his fingers slipped to the side of the throne where he had noticed a ring of keys hanging from a hook. He slid one key into his palm and rose smoothly, finishing his story with a soft ending that made the king sigh with satisfaction. The king, pleased and drowsy with entertainment, did not notice the missing key. Later, when torches burned low and the guards changed, the nervous servant boy appeared near the corridor. Sinbad pressed the stolen key into his hand. "Open the iron box," he whispered. "Take the black stone and throw it into the sea from the highest cliff." The boy's hands shook. "He will punish me," he breathed. "He already punishes your whole island," Sinbad replied gently. "This is the only door out." The boy swallowed and nodded once, as if choosing courage over fear. While the boy slipped away, Sinbad returned to the prisoners and loosened their knots carefully. One sailor rubbed his wrists, ready to run, but Sinbad held up a hand. "Quiet," he whispered. "We leave like shadows." Together they moved through the village, keeping to darker paths, timing their steps with distant footsteps and the crackle of the hall's fire. Then the wind shifted. From the direction of the hall came a sound like a deep exhale, not angry but relieved, as if something heavy had been lifted. Moments later the servant boy ran to them, breathless and wide-eyed. "It's done," he whispered. "The stone was colder than night. I threw it into the sea and the king collapsed into sleep like a child who finally stopped fighting." Sinbad gripped the boy's shoulder. "Come with us," he urged. The boy looked back at the village, then nodded and followed. They reached the beach and pushed a small boat into the water. The sea was calm, and moonlight laid a silver path across it. They rowed hard to their ship, where the remaining crew hauled them aboard with cries of relief. At dawn the ship sailed away, and Sinbad stood at the rail watching the island shrink behind them. He did not feel loud triumph. He felt grateful that cleverness and kindness had saved lives, and hopeful that a cursed king might wake with a clearer heart. When Sinbad returned home, he told the tale gently. He said that sometimes a person becomes frightening because they are trapped by something dark, and that bravery can mean breaking the spell rather than breaking the person. He reminded listeners that panic makes danger bigger, but calm thinking makes a path appear. And whenever he heard gulls calling at dusk, he remembered the iron box beneath the throne and kept one lesson close as a warm cup of tea. Courage is often quiet, and the best rescue begins with a steady mind.